Ready to roll on a Friday. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. No football on Thursday. The NFL did all the football taking as it does on opening night of the NFL. I believe the Chiefs defeated the Ravens. That's about all I know. No, Xavier Worthy, former Texas star with 2 touchdowns. But the college football landscape stops if the NFL wants it to. Or probably the NFL could care less what college football does. It's that the college football landscape and college football powers that be cower to the NFL. I get it, but at the same time, play games at 6 o'clock Eastern, get them in before 8:20, get them to the third quarter by 8:20, and hang on to an audience if you've got a game or two that are decent games. I'm not talking about putting your best games on Thursday night. I'm talking about putting decent games on Thursday, the same type of games that we've seen on Thursday and Friday nights for the last couple decades. Put those Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. You're wasting television windows. But nobody runs this sport. Nobody runs the sport. Everybody runs their own conference. Nobody runs the sport. Governing body commissioner would be good. Welcome into the Voice of College Football, and it's the College Football Show. Why is it the College Football Show? Well, we want it to be your destination every weekday morning. We started this after the conference media days. We're running through the national championship game, and I will be here for sure, God willing, after the national championship game on that Tuesday. Then we will look at the off-season schedule from there. But Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern time for 1 full hour for sure. And then if you would like overtime, that is up to all of you. I would love to sit here for 5 or 6 hours talking college football with you, but that is certainly up to you. We appreciate you being here. We've got a couple great guests stopping by, and I have lost the banner to give the conditions on overtime. So that's not fair. We go $100 in the super chat for the next hour past 11 a.m. Eastern time, or past the 1 hour mark since we are late. Thank you for your patience. It reminds me to use the Amazon link in the description section. Why? Because my laptop here is 14 years old and it's just not kicking up this monitor in time. Otherwise, we would be on time. Start early, Mark. Yeah, that's obviously the remedy. That's probably not going to happen, but appreciate you being here. Amazon links in the description section. Our schedule looks like this today. You're here right now. Perfect. Recording with Steve Merrill of Wager Talk this afternoon. That is going to be available as individual segments on all the team channels. If you're not familiar, if you're interested in the wagering side of things, where you been? You got to lock in on this. Steve Merrill, Wager Talk, records with us typically on Thursday, this week, Friday, and we run through all the big games, post those on the individual team channels. He gives you a clear lean. He runs his simulations. He's remarkable. Check out Wager Talk, and you will see. And, of course, Steve's got his under-the-radar selection. Week 1, nailed it again. Said take a Pitt, lay the 24, covered by a touchdown. Bingo, he's 22-5 against the spread. I had a decent week. Don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I'm going to hit close to 60% against the spread. Please check out what we've got available for you through Patreon, through YouTube, $99 a month if you want to make some money on the football games. If you just enjoy the football games, then hey, we're here for that too. You know that we produce more videos and live streams than anyone that I can imagine. We should do a contest. That would be a good contest. Find the channel that does more videos and live streams than we do. Find the network that does more videos and live streams. I know that I'm currently hosting 15 live streams a week, 5 morning shows, post-game Thursday, Friday, Saturday, call-in show Sunday morning, that's 9. Oklahoma, Ohio State, Iowa, USC, Miami, Florida State, 6 plus 9 is 15. 15 shows a week just for me. All right. Week 2 is huge for a lot of teams. And folks, this is starting to settle in for everyone what the CFP expansion to 12 teams means. It's starting to settle in now. Take a game like Iowa State. In past seasons, okay, is Iowa going to be a contender in the Big Ten West? Well, they always are. How good are they going to be against Iowa State? Is Iowa State any good? Matt Campbell's got a decent program. He's building them. Okay, Iowa State. It's a nationally, it's a game. Usually ranks about fourth and to fifth in the television ratings for the week, something like that. About 3 million people watch the game. It's just it's a rivalry game that people enjoy, that love college football, that enjoy tradition. But these teams aren't really a serious threat to do anything. And even if they are, they got to do it inside their conference. They're not going to have a good enough overall record to make a 14 playoff. Voila. Now we've got a 12-team playoff. Iowa, clear path to the playoff if they play up to their potential, go 10-2, 11-1. Iowa State, that's the struggle right there in regards to figuring out, does the Big 12 get a second team in? If so, then this is a big game for Iowa State. Huge game for Iowa State. Must win for Iowa State if they want to be a non-champion going to the playoff. Otherwise, maybe the Big 12 just gets the champion in and forget the rest of the conference, and it really doesn't matter from a national perspective what Iowa State does on Saturday. But for Iowa, huge game for sure. So this college football playoff expansion completely changes games like this. Tennessee, NC State, sure, they're gunning for the SEC championship, and they're gunning for the ACC championship. But if they don't get it, this is a huge game for Tennessee and NC State to make that next step to get to the playoff. All right. Appreciate you being here. We will run down week 2. Got a couple great guests, and we will go to your calls. We got our buddy Dominic on the line. Dominic, how you doing? I think you're there, though you're not on the screen.
I'm here.
How you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. How about you?
I am doing just fine. What's going on today?
Not much, man, but
There we
week
go.
2 is here, and we got some big games on the line for this week. Some big games like Texas and Michigan. Like, that's honestly the biggest game of the week.
So yes, that's conventional thinking. I would argue that it's not the biggest game of the week because of what I just talked about. Texas and Michigan are much more viable in their conferences to win the conference championship, and the SEC and the Big Ten will get 4 to 5 slots per conference. Therefore, they can slip up more so than these other teams. But case in point, yes. From a conventional perspective, yes, biggest game of the week, biggest brands playing. Yes, absolutely.
Right, and I heard you just mention number 14 Tennessee against number 24 NC State. Don't sleep on NC State for too long if I were you. They are in contention for the ACC title, like you just said a moment ago. So don't sleep on the Wolfpack for too long.
Well, nobody that pays attention to the sport, I think, is sleeping on NC State. I picked them to win the ACC. They are a sizable underdog, and I posted a preview this morning on that game.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Oh, I'll have to check that out after I'm
Give it a
done
look.
talking.
It's only about 5 minutes.
Oh, I'll definitely watch it after I'm done talking with you. But yeah, see if there's so. But yeah, I got some big games like Iowa and Iowa State. That's the Corn State rivalry, I think it's called. Corn State rivalry. Like you said, this is a big game for the Cyclones. A big game. Honestly, in my opinion, a big game for both teams. It is a rivalry, and not a lot of people pay attention to that game, but I do, and it could be back and forth either way.
So you've been paying attention to Iowa State games in the past.
Yes, I have.
Okay. Who's dominated this series?
Mostly the Hawkeyes.
There you go. You've been paying attention to this. I would lay my life on the line knowing that Dominic has been watching the Cy-Hawk game every year.
Don't forget Notre Dame. Oh, yeah, don't forget Notre Dame, honestly. Yeah, don't forget them. They could make the 12-team playoff. Don't sleep on the Irish.
Nobody's sleeping on the Irish, I don't think. I don't believe.
I'm certainly not, because
Okay.
I think they could make the playoffs. I could think they could get like the 10 seed, I think, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
They could get the 5 seed or anything from the 5 to the 12. That's what they're
Yes.
eligible for.
Right. Well, that's pretty much all I got, Mark. I will
Anybody
see
else we're
you.
sleeping on, Dominic?
Anyone else we're sleeping on? Um, Honestly, I'm kind of sleeping on Louisville.
Okay. You are sleeping on Louisville. Okay. Just wanted to check. Dominic, we appreciate the call.
See ya.
Who aren't we sleeping on? I'm not sleeping on Georgia. Not sleeping on Georgia. That's my definitive statement for the day. Not sleeping on Georgia. No siree. Sleeping on Akron. I'm going to sleep on Akron. All right. Appreciate you being here. And we would love to take this to overtime. That is up to you. Thank you so much for the contributions, folks. Amazon links in the description section. That's the easiest way to contribute. When you shop on Amazon, use our link. We've got a couple guests coming up, talking Big 12 and talking that Tennessee-NC State matchup. And again, I posted preview videos. They're called videos of Iowa State, North Carolina, Iowa State, Iowa. Yes, that's who they're playing. NC State and Tennessee, and Nebraska, Colorado. Those 3 games are all on my docket for my viewing pleasure. What intrigues me most once we get to this portion of the season is especially the week 2 matchups. Week 1's kind of sparse. Week 2 has more interconference matchups. There's a ton of them. And you're going to start to get an evaluation, or I am, because I pay attention to this stuff, of which conference is playing the best. Was there a conference that really stepped up this week that proved something? The Big 12, in particular, if the Big 12, they can't do anything about the schedule this season, but if they want to enter multiple teams into this playoff, they are going to have to schedule difficult non-conference games. They have not done that this season. They did not accomplish that this season. I would think Brett Yormark would get on that. Don't know when these games were necessarily scheduled, probably 5 to 10 years ago. Different world at that point. But in a 12-team playoff, to get that second Big 12 team in, just like the ACC, but the ACC schedules difficult non-conference games. They've got the contract with Notre Dame. Between the conference playing the SEC, all these SEC games that they typically schedule, this conference is playing Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina, on down the line. Always schedule a lot of SEC games. But the Big 12, what can the Big 12 really show at the end of the season to say, our second team deserves it? Unless they just have such an outstanding record. Let's say they've got an 11-1 football team that loses the Big 12 championship game and they're 11-2. And they want to say, okay, our 11-2 is better than all your 10-2s. And there might be some 9-3s in the SEC, especially maybe the Big 10, that would say, hey, look at our 9-3. And then you've got a beauty contest going on. You got a metrics contest as well between 11-2 out of the Big 12 as a championship game loser and 9-3 or 10-2 out of the Big 10 or the SEC. But who are these teams playing? Iowa State might be playing the best team of anybody. And correct me if I'm wrong, as I comb through these schedules, through the Rolodex up here, Iowa State is probably playing the toughest non-conference game in the Big 12. Well, West Virginia played Penn State, but they failed. So there you go. West Virginia lost by 22 at home to Penn State. So that's a failure. If West Virginia would, of course, won the game, that would have looked good for the Big 12, or if they would have played close. They didn't play close, so bam, big failure for the Big 12 in trying to get a second team to show, hey, we've stepped out. We played a couple games against the Big 10, Iowa, Penn State. We did well. Let's say we lost one game by a touchdown and we won the other game. If Iowa State beats Iowa, this is going to be the best season, this is going to be the best resume point for the Big 12. I can't think of any other. Utah plays no one. Colorado, well, if Nebraska surprises in the Big 10, but that can't be expected. 8-4, I believe, is the best Nebraska can do. I can't imagine them doing better than 8-4 in the Big 10. Other than that, my goodness, Oklahoma State, Arkansas is their big game. Kansas State, Tulane is their big game. Kansas plays Illinois tonight or Saturday. That's their big game. TCU played Stanford. The more I think about this, the more I look at the Big 12's non-conference scheduling, it is especially bad this season. And it's never stood out to me as being this horrible. I've always thought they go out and schedule just about at the level that everyone else does, non-conference. But this year, it's terrible. It's terrible. And they have not afforded their teams the opportunity to go out and beat somebody. Well, two of them, yes. If Penn State goes on to have a great season, if Iowa goes on to have a great season, they afforded two teams the opportunity. And it's not the Big 12's problem. It's not the Big 12 office problem. They don't schedule the games. The individual teams, programs go out and schedule the games. But Brett Yormark's going to have a conference call with the troops to say, our champion gets in. If we want a second team in, we got to go out and beat someone. Well, we can't go out and beat anybody if we don't play anyone. West Virginia, congratulations for the last 2 years, but you lost by 23 and 22 points. So you attempted that. And if Pitt was any good, then they would have that opportunity. But Pitt's no good until further notice. And again, Iowa State, they always play. And the Hawkeyes aren't going to necessarily move the needle most of the time. All right, folks. We do appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. I believe we've got our man Corey on the line. No, we don't. We've got a caller coming in. I was just trying to figure out what we had here.
What's going on, Mark?
We got Kyle. I'm sorry. I did not expect Kyle to show up as a guest today.
Sorry about that, Mark.
A couple other guests, and I didn't know if we had a caller, if we had one of our scheduled guests. Kyle, how you doing today?
How you doing, sir? Good to talk to you. Sorry, it's been a bit since we've talked about Auburn football, but it has been quite busy. And when you're scoring 73 points in a game, which is unheard of these days for Auburn football, it keeps you quite busy.
Yeah. I can't say that I or most people know anything about that game other than the score. That's about it. And then I expect that the box score was impressive, but 73-3, obviously nobody's checking in on Alabama A&M.
No, nobody's checking in on them. We had a few Alabama A&M fans trying to say that they were going to expose us this past week, and they did expose us, just in the opposite way. They exposed that Auburn seemingly has a capable offense. I grant you, it's against FCS talent and all that part of the discussion. We don't ignore that, but let's enjoy it, folks. This is an Auburn team, an Auburn program that has struggled to have strong offensive plays, strong offensive stats for years now. And when you break a record for 6 passing touchdowns across 2 different quarterbacks in one game, there's a lot to celebrate as long as you keep it in the proper context of everything.
Kyle Lumis here from E2C Network to break down the Auburn Tigers stepping out of conference at home this year. They played Cal last year, squeaked through with a win on the road on the West Coast, and now they've got a date against the the ACC Cal Golden Bears. So it's another SEC ACC matchup, but one we didn't necessarily see coming.
Right.
All right. So you make the point that while this is what Auburn should do, this is not what everyone does.
Right.
So at least they went out and looked like what a top team does, as we looked around the SEC and saw a lot of 50s and 60s against a lot of 0s and 3s. And Auburn was one of those. So at least they took care of business in the fashion that you would expect.
All right.
Yeah. You definitely hope that you go out and look like you're an FBS school that's taking on an FCS school. Now, granted, every once in a while, and I think I saw a stat yesterday that an FCS school has beaten an FBS school for every year consecutively for a while now. So thankfully, Auburn's not that statistic, but it's on the statistic that's most common, just taking care of business against them. Yeah, look, the freshman wide receivers, wow, just just wow in their debut. Ironically enough, we're talking about Cam Coleman at wide receiver, Perry Thompson. Those two should be names most people that are recruiting junkies should be very well aware of, and the escapades and the process that led to them flipping to Auburn from Alabama and Texas A&M. But probably the guy that we're most interested in, whether we're talking about last game or going forward because of how he contributed offensively and special teams, is Malcolm Simmons. Had a passing touchdown, but also was on special teams and picked up, I should say, a blocked kick to essentially get into the end zone and score a touchdown as well. So he's displaying speed, athleticism, and capability as we expected out there at the wide receiver position. So I think he walks away as the freshman wide receiver phenom more than anybody else that day.
Well, Kyle, we've got another guest coming in, but we want to get your quick take on what to expect, what to look out for. Again, this was an Auburn team that barely skated by Cal last year, but it's at home in the friendly confines. Cal expects to have somewhat of a similar team than what they had last year. So what are you looking for?
I think it's funny that you slipped up, as I have, calling it, Pac-12, or it's weird just saying ACC with Cal. So that's obviously a little bit fun we've been having with the Cal fans this week. I am looking for this to be a much different game, not in the way that I think we will dominate, although I think eventually the confines of Jordan-Hare will be way too much for the Cal Golden Bears. They obviously have a new quarterback in Mendoza, and their former quarterback who gave us so much trouble last year, Sam Jackson, is now our wide receiver who caught a touchdown in game one for us. One of the many that did. So what I'm expecting out of this game is for it to be a relatively close one for the majority of the game. I do expect Auburn to, even if they don't score first, reclaim the lead fairly quickly and hang on to it throughout the course of the game. I do expect Cal to make a couple of swings here and there to keep it fairly close, maybe within a score. But by the end of it, I think it's just going to be too much for the Cal Golden Bears to come into Jordan-Hare and not make a few mistakes in the environment that the Auburn faithful will give to them. And you couple that with the talent that's been out there in game one, as we've seen, and what I can say looks like revamped and ready to roll Peyton Thorne. It's a potent mix for anybody, but the Cal Bears, I think, are going to suffer a little bit by the end of this.
Auburn's roughly a 2-touchdown favorite at home, taking on Cal, I believe 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central, ESPN 2.
ESPN 2.
Yes. Okay. Kyle, enjoy. Everybody check out Kyle's work, the rest of the crew there. E2C Network. It's not just Auburn football, but the entire Auburn community, Auburn culture, Auburn everything.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too.
And let's keep it moving. Of course, one of the big games is in prime time, and we've talked about this game all week, but we will do a much better job of talking about this game because we got Corey Smith on the line from Pack Pride. Corey, how you doing?
Doing well, Mark. How are you, sir? Sorry, I'm not in my normal background here. I've got multiple people working from home, so I'm downstairs this time around.
Hey, as long as we can see you, we don't even need to see you. We would like to see you. That's good, but at least as long as we can hear you, then we are good to go. NC State will start with the Western Carolina game. Less than pretty, down 4 in the fourth quarter. Gave up maybe way too much rushing yardage. I probably saw 75% of this game. Grayson McCall, of course, working with his new team, his new receivers for the first time in a game. Missed some throws downfield, but still racked up 318 yards passing. So what are your biggest takeaways in regards to legitimate concerns versus shaking off the rust?
Yeah, there was some shaking out the rust. I mean, you look at Grayson McCall, a normally accurate quarterback, a guy that's thrown for nearly 70% in his career and had some off throws, a couple that, guys like Noah Rogers, Kevin Concepcion were able to go back and get and haul in, but not really, crisp on his part. We saw it a little bit more in the fourth quarter. I mean, looked better on some passes there. And obviously, Jordan Waters getting going in the fourth quarter helped a lot. The major concern I have offensively was more so the offensive line, the run blocking. Pass blocking was good. That'll be tested this week against James Pierce Jr. and that offensive line, Tyree West, guys like that. But the run protection just was not good there for NC State. That's going to have to take a significant uptick. And then as far as, shaking off the rust defensively, you get your guy that's playing middle linebacker stepping up in that spot, Caden Fordham getting ejected 5 plays into the game. That's never a good look. And then that's the guy that's wearing the earpiece for you inside the first time ever. They have to switch that up, and that caused some issues defensively. We talked about the run game. The biggest concern I have from that in terms of what NC State did in that game against Western Carolina was allowing entirely too many yards on the ground by the quarterback. Cole Gonzalez, a guy that is mobile, but a 50-yard run for him that set up a touchdown, and then another one that was like 20-plus yards that set up a touchdown. Those are not ideal when you're going up against Nico Emaliava this coming up week, a guy that can run the football and one that will run the football against NC State. So while everybody's worried about Nico's arm, I'm a little more concerned with that mobility given what NC State did this past week against Western.
Corey, we'll keep it right there with the Nico factor against this defense and really the entire offense. We talked some Tennessee yesterday, and this might be slightly slanted, but our Tennessee guy, Charlie Burris of Big Orange Podcast, thinks that their offense could rival what they did 2 years ago, which under Hendon Hooker was the number one offense in college football, because they've got, of course, Dylan Sampson at running back, and they've got an array of wide receivers that we could run down that will probably vie for a spot in the NFL. So, and an offensive line that was a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award. They're just loaded on offense. So it's one thing to focus on Iamaliava. It's another thing to focus too much on him. And obviously, if he just becomes a distributor, then you've got weapons to worry about as well.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest concern for NC State fans when they were watching on Saturday, get a chance to get a Saturday off and go watch some Tennessee football. And it's like, all right, let's see if Iamaliava is actually going to be as good as advertised. And he was. So, you kind of chalk that up to, oh, crap. He's got all the weapons around him. He's got the offensive line. He's got a really good running back behind him. And if he's not good, then maybe Tennessee won't be as good as we thought. And then he was. So, you're watching this going, all right, well, yes, it's against Chattanooga. It's not a great team overall. They played him about, 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, 10 yards at times, trying to protect from the deep ball. And it didn't work because he is crisp on his passes, threw a couple into really double and sometimes triple coverage, and guys were still able to come down with the ball. So it's not that to me, I think for NC State, you're watching that going, all right, well, we're going to have our hands full with this guy. I think for NC State, the one way to attack him, though, is while he does look like the uber talented quarterback that everybody expected, he also, trusts his arm quite a bit. He trusts himself to be able to throw into some of those tight windows. Those windows will get a little bit tighter against the NC State defense. So if they play sound man defense and have, a safety over the top, a guy like a Bishop Fitzgerald that had a couple interceptions last year, another guy like a Kerry Martin, or even, Jihad Carter playing the nickel, all guys that have experience and they've been veterans. And then, kind of the X factor here being DK Kaufman, a guy that comes over from Auburn, has played against SEC speed, has played against Tennessee in the past. Those types of guys, if they're able to, be those veterans and finish off plays, and be able to get some interceptions, flip the field for NC State, as it were. This is a chance for them to be able to make this a tight game and going into the fourth quarter. So that, I think, is going to be the X factor here is he as crisp against NC State as he was against Chattanooga? Because you didn't really see it against Iowa in the last game, despite the fact that they were able to rout them. Is NC State able to slow down that offense a little bit and be able to force turnovers?
Got Corey Smith on the line from Pack Pride 247 Sports. You see all the information down below. You can track Corey's work. NC State taking on Tennessee, huge game, ABC primetime. On the NC State side, back to Grayson McCall and company, KC, Kevin Concepcion. I'm going to refrain from calling him some kind of wild card or X factor, because to me, that's a guy that you need to be good, but you don't know if he's going to show up. He shows up sometimes, other times he doesn't. No, Concepcion, 71 catches, 10 touchdowns last year, and was second on the team in rushing. And then we watched him haul in 3 touchdowns against Western Carolina. And here's a guy that could be, let's say, an X factor from the standpoint of he can line up anywhere, confuse the Tennessee defense. Where is he? And get him the football.
Yeah, I mean, most of the comparisons to his game have been, Percy Harvin when he was at Florida, guys like Tavon Austin at West Virginia, those types of X factor type players. And also, he did return a punt in the last game as well. So if it comes down to that, if they're able to stop this Tennessee offense and force them to punt at times, he could be another X factor there as well. Kevin Concepcion is a guy that, yes, they're going to line him up in a number of different ways. I don't necessarily think they're going to try to run the football with him as much, but you will see some pop passes, maybe some end arounds, and give him an opportunity. I could even see him potentially trying to throw a pass in this one, just because of the fact that they're going to try to throw everything but the kitchen sink at this Tennessee team and try to get something going offensively. But I think if you're looking for an X factor outside of Kevin Concepcion and Noah Rogers, Wesley Grimes, the other outside receivers for NC State that didn't have as big of an impact this past week, but I think it's because of the fact that they were able to utilize Kevin Concepcion in so many different ways. If Tennessee finds a way to limit him or double teams him even in the secondary, I do think they go to a guy like Noah Rogers, a big body wide receiver, 6'3". And then they also have Justin Jolie underneath as well, 6'3", 250 pounds, lines up like a linebacker, but he has great hands. Would have had over 100 yards this past week, if not for a 43-yard touchdown being taken off the board. So there's a bunch of different guys in this offense. I know everybody's focused on the Tennessee offense and looking at how many weapons they have. NC State has a ton of weapons too, and Kevin Concepcion is obviously priority number 1 for Tennessee. But if they try to take him away, I'm interested to see how these other guys step up around him as well.
Corey, my take on NC State in previous seasons in which there was hope or optimism that this would be a good season, we're cycling up, this could be a really good team, was more or less, let's get through 5 or 6 games. We see a Clemson, we see a Florida State, those kind of games on the schedule, of course, maybe a big non-conference game. Notre Dame obviously shows up about half the time. Then if we get through those, win 2 out of 3, and we're sitting at 7-1, then we can start to hope. And but with the 12-team playoff, this suddenly becomes a game like, of course, there's a path with the ACC just winning the championship, but this becomes a game like, if you're not going to win your conference, this then becomes the resume check mark that, wow, we beat Tennessee. We've got a top 15 win in the country.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's been some talk, Josh Pate on our network 24/7, mentioned earlier this week that NC State is viewing this as their Super Bowl. I wouldn't put it, that high up there, because there is still a lot to play for. The Super Bowl will probably be closer to the end of the year if NC State is in the mix to go to the ACC championship game, which it has not done under Dave Doran. If you've got that opportunity, one of those games will probably be a Super Bowl for NC State. But this early in the season, the reason why this game is so important is exactly what you just mentioned there. If you're going to be in the college football playoff discussion, if you're going to be viewed as one of these teams that if you don't win your conference, you can potentially get in, you've got to beat a team like Tennessee, because as much as the conversation has been, oh, well, Tennessee and Clemson in the first, month of the season, well, we don't really know what Clemson's going to be capable of this season. You just saw them get routed 34-0 or 3, whatever it was, against Georgia this past weekend. For NC State, you're going, all right, well, even if we beat Clemson on the road, is that going to be viewed as a quality win if that team goes 9-3 on the season? Yes, it's a great win on the road, but none of these games moving forward are guaranteed to be great wins, whereas Tennessee is already being talked about as, Nico Maliava being a Heisman candidate, and this, defensive line being one of the best in the country. This offense, the veer and shoot offense being one of the best in the country as well. Can this team contend for the SEC? Whereas NC State's being looked at as, oh, they were really bad in week 1 and they're not going to be good this week. So yes, there's a lot on the line for NC State this week. There's still a lot more to play for if you lose this game, but losing it in a rout, if you lose it, a 34-17 or something along those lines, and you don't look extremely competitive, that can be extremely damaging for what NC State's trying to do in the season overall.
Corey Smith, Pack Pride, would encourage everyone to get yourself knowledgeable on the game and NC State football right there with Corey. Corey, appreciate you stopping by, answering the call to jump on here and talk some Tennessee, NC State.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me.
Good stuff right there from Corey. Again, it's a big game, and it's my number one game of the primetime window, as I will be looking at 2 games per window. That's all I can handle, basically. The third game gets lost. So NC State, Tennessee for me, with Nebraska, Colorado. And we will keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. We got Nathan Brown stopping by to talk a little Big 12 and BYU. Nathan,
how we doing, Mark? You caught me early this morning.
Oh, I know. That's why I was a bit surprised when you answered the call and said, hey, I'll jump on. I'm awake.
Anytime. You bet. If I'm here, I'm good for you.
Oh, you're probably about as awake as I am, but you've got a much better excuse because you're 2 hours earlier.
Yep.
These morning shows, even though, hey, I was the guy that decided I'm doing a morning show, not necessarily the time that my brain and my mouth is functioning best, but we make it through every morning. Let's talk about the Big 12 first and foremost, because a lot of us media guys and others and fans, depending on how much conference pride they have, love to start to add up the numbers. What's the record against the other conferences? What were the matchups and so forth? Well, the Big 12's got a decent week here in trying to prove, BYU, SMU, Kansas going to Illinois, and other matchups, Iowa State, of course.
Right.
The annual affair against what I was talking about a few minutes ago is probably one of 2 teams that the Big 12 is playing outside the conference that will be in some kind of playoff conversation. The other one was the Penn State-West Virginia game. So unfortunately for the Big 12, they didn't get it done there. So your thoughts about the Big 12 trying to gain some respect, because this could be huge in trying to get a second team in the playoff.
Oh, the reception's massive. The ACC's down. Don't take that personal. If you're an ACC fan, your banner schools have lost. If Miami hadn't just throttled Florida, where are you? Your biggest wins are SMU and, down the line. Boston College, was it a good win? Sure, they beat a Florida State team that might win 5 games. Who knows where they end up? But so in comparison, you're right. The bragging rights matter. Perception matters, especially in this. They have P2 and everybody else. And so I think the Big 12's got a good spot. That West Virginia one hurt. BYU has to beat SMU tonight. That perception battle, if we get behind on a conference level by BYU losing to SMU, that would not look good either. And so we need to really step up our game. Got some good teams. Not a lot of out of conference matchups that really open the eyes. Iowa State's a good one. But yeah, these are few and far between. You're exactly right. And there's only a few many times you can go to the well and come up empty.
Yeah, everybody basically plays the one big non-conference game for Utah. And this might be unfortunate for the Big 12 if Utah doesn't win the championship and they have let's say they have some sterling 11-1 season and lose the Big 12 championship game by a field goal. And Baylor, yes, everyone, Baylor is their non-conference game as a conference opponent. That's not again. So it's probably more going to be about, okay, let's show you our nice record overall against the other conferences, because there's probably not going to be a great win in there because there are no opportunities. The Big 12 just didn't schedule those. And when I say the Big 12, I mean the individual schools, of course, did not schedule the kind of games that they've scheduled in the past.
Right. That Baylor game, when it was originally scheduled, was out of conference, and Baylor had just won the Big 12. So 3 years later, 3 years later, and that doesn't look as good now. So at the end of the day, if we're head to head with the ACC for what I would call the second spot, right? Not the non-guaranteed 4 and 4, which are pretty much going to go to the SEC and the Big Ten. To get that second one in, you have to have at least one more team step up. Now, Utah, like you said, plays Baylor this week, but unfortunately, Utah's got the weakest schedule of all the competitors, so that doesn't help either. Oklahoma State plays a decent schedule, so does Kansas State. But again, nothing stellar. So Brett Yormark needs to get with his schools, and he needs to say, "Look, we need at least every school in the conference should have played at least one good out of conference game. I don't care about your FCS or your throwaway games, your participation trophy type games. I need you to go out and try to schedule a Wisconsin. I need you to go out and try to schedule a Clemson or a Florida State, or maybe a middle SEC school like an A&M or Mississippi State. I think it's incumbent on that directive. And if the schools aren't doing it and they get left out, they only have themselves to blame."
Wow. Sounds like what I was saying about a half hour ago. Yes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Absolutely. I said,
Great.
Brett Yormark needs to have a Zoom call with everyone and say,
Yeah.
I'm not blaming anyone for anything now because you've done this in the past, but this
Right.
particular season is not going to help us because we got to get a second team in. And the way we're going to do it is say, hey, Oklahoma State beat Tennessee, or
Yes.
West Virginia beat Penn State, and of course that game was scheduled, but win a couple of those games and it changes things dramatically.
Yes.
BYU gets the easy non-conference win to start the season. Then they move into this SMU game that Vegas doesn't really like your chances in, about 11 to 12 point underdog, something in that range. What's the path to a victory here for BYU?
They can't turn the ball over, and their offense needs to run the ball. If they can do those two things, Retzlaff, the new quarterback, he played last year too. He actually looked good last week. He made some tight window throws that, the competition was down, but the spacing between the athletes was almost nil, and he was still able to get in there. He has a strange ball flight. He's left-handed, and it's kind of a sidearm. I don't know if you've ever seen him throw, but kind of looks like a baseball shortstop type of a throw to first base. So if he doesn't turn the ball over, and he's got smaller hands, he fumbled quite a bit last year. If he doesn't fumble this year, doesn't turn the ball over, the defense is built to keep the team in the game. It just really comes down to, can the offense prepare and then overperform. And I think SMU's overrated, one. And two, I think they're ripe for a fall. Their stadium is nothing to really brag about. Probably will be filled with half Cougars anyway. BYU, the LDS Church is huge in Texas, so I'll be surprised if half that high school stadium is packed. And I think BYU could win by more than a touchdown.
There we go. BYU and SMU. Do you like this as a non-conference matchup, or is it just kind of meh?
No, I hate it.
You hate it.
I hate it. And when they scheduled it, I hated it. They were in the AAC, of course, when they did the original scheduling agreement. Now it's really, really bad because we're talking about the fight for the life of the P2, and then there's going to be, in my guesstimation, there's going to be one more. There's going to be a P3 that has the best of whoever's left, and SMU. Honestly, they didn't earn their way there. They didn't put in the hard work that every other school needed to. Even Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF put in hard work to get to where they're at in the Big 12. SMU wrote a check. I don't respect that. Sure, it's a free country. If they can get away with it, no problem. But it's not where we want to be. And certainly the Big 12 does not want to be losing to SMU, who's currently, I believe, behind two high school teams for their viewership in Dallas.
That wasn't a joke, folks.
No, it is. That's a fact.
Yes, that was not a joke.
Yeah, last year they averaged 85,000 fans watching on television. On television.
Yes. Well, we understand that that's a horrendous number, folks. We do a big series with the TV ratings and everybody sees that, but that will be bumped up by the ACC just by the mere fact that you're playing Florida State and other teams in the ACC, it's
Mm,
obviously going to get a bump.
maybe, but the bump isn't going to come from SMU fans. The
No,
bump is going to
no,
come
it's
from
the other
Florida
team.
State fans, are going to
Yeah,
come from Clemson fans, are going to come from NC State fans.
yeah.
So yeah, it'll be artificial, but it won't be artificial the way that people watching might be thinking of. It's actually that fan base. One, it's a very small school anyway. They don't have a huge alumni base as it stands. Lots of money, but money doesn't equal viewers. Money doesn't put butts in the seats or make people watch on a Friday or Saturday night. So when the ACC picked them up for the carriage fees with ESPN, that's all it was for. Carriage fees at ESPN had nothing to do with value ads driven by actual people watching the games in the stadium or buying merchandise in other schools.
Nathan, I realize there's been no big news concerning realignment in recent weeks since the
Right.
last time we talked to you, but has anything been the talk of the town that has caused you to think otherwise recently? Obviously, we did get the news this week that the UConn
Right.
Big 12 connection has cooled down considerably, and that's very understandable when you read through, obviously, just everything that's going on with the conference right now. Do you think that that is window dressing, meaning that that's a smoke screen, that we're truly not interested in UConn, but this just covers up that fact with a lot of excuses, or those are legitimate challenges and adversity, and they'll get back to UConn at some point?
They're legitimate challenges, and honestly, unless they only went basketball, they could come in as a basketball ad today, and probably most of the presidents would vote for it. But bring them in as a basketball and then maybe a football in 6 years. They don't want to have their names on a contract that says anything like that. So, in my opinion, this was something again. Brett Yormark's tried the same move twice now. He brought in consultants. He went to the presidents of the schools and said, hey, look, these guys are valuable, Northeast and all that other stuff. That's his background, is basketball, in case you didn't know. So him trying to do that 2 years in a row is not a shocker. I think it was a little bit head scratcher that it leaked the way it did a couple weeks ago. Didn't really make a ton of sense. So you either have to look at it as a leak on purpose to give the presidents cover so they didn't have to go back to their schools and say, yeah, we're considering UConn, or it was a genuine leak and it indeed did slow something down from happening. In my opinion, there is no drive to get UConn before anything happens with the ACC. It's always been that way. I will never understand, even if they sign tomorrow, I will never understand why they would take a UConn, who they can get whenever they want them, to take up a potential spot from somebody out of the ACC. It makes absolutely no sense. And by the way, I've talked to people at UConn, and they understand where they stand, where they sit. Right? They're not dumb. So I just, yeah, I don't think anything happens with them, or Gonzaga, or anybody else for that matter, until the ACC is resolved.
So my one question about UConn possibly joining in football later down the road. So there was that 2031 date that was
Right,
given,
right.
and then get your football program. It gives you about 5 years to get it in order. What
Yeah,
are we talking about there? Because obviously, from a roster standpoint, you're not going to get your football team ready by then. Maybe you
right,
get a year or two, but you're not going to sign a 4-star in 2025 for
right.
2031. So that's not going to happen. Maybe you can sell that a year out and get that recruiting class leading into it. But are we talking facilities, resources? What else could be done to this football program to get them ready for a date later down the road?
So when we talk facilities, everything on campus, the stadium, all the locker rooms and stuff for the teams are magnificent. They're stellar. They're some of the best in the entire country. The stadium's off campus. It's older. They rent it. So yes, I think that's a glaring one you have to look at. But the other half is kind of what SMU has shown to have, and that's the resilience of money. If you're asking what should their commitment level be, I would say revenue growth. I would show maybe they would have some sort of an athletic budget set aside just to get them from now to an inclusion 30, 31, something like that. They need to show a level of investment and commitment that up to now they have not shown. They were good. in the 90s and the aught 10s. We saw their teams make it to January 6 bowls. January bowls. But what we haven't seen is the level of commitment for the money part of it. That money's going to basketball right now. I don't know what Brett Yormark would put in a contract, but it would have to be something that was very finite and you could drill down on. And I think some of that was gray area. I think and I don't know, I'm not in the room, but I'm picturing it. Brett is really trying to get this in the door, underneath the door, without people paying attention, maybe in detail saying, trust me, bro. And those details weren't filled out. And I find it hard to believe that they would do anything until the ACC's done.
Nathan Brown at Big 12 Mafia. You can find it right here on YouTube. When's the next show coming up?
Tonight, Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. 7 p.m. Eastern. Big freaking Friday show. It's a party show. And we preview all week too. It's going to be a lot of fun. Come in and sit with us.
Nathan, appreciate you stopping by, even though that cup of coffee hasn't quite settled in.
That is quite all right. Mark, always, thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks, Nathan. Have a good day.
All right,
Enjoy the football.
You too. Bye-bye.
If you're watching football tonight, you're probably watching BYU. We also have Northwestern taking on Duke. Those are the two games that I want to watch. Indiana playing whoever they're playing, whatever. They've got a horrendous schedule. Indiana does. They should be embarrassed. They should be embarrassed. We are just about out of time. However, there was something posted. You guys were going in on conferences. So we had the earlier discussion about so many other teams obviously vying for a playoff spot, and just it changes the scope of these games completely. Tennessee, NC State's huge. Iowa State becomes huge because of the 12-team playoff. How many teams could possibly make the playoff? Well, everybody's still alive right now for the playoff. So that's 70 teams. Plus then you get the group of 5 and all those teams that could make it from the group of 5. Obviously, nobody's eliminated right now, technically. Okay. Realistically, based on what we've seen through 1 week and what we expect these teams to be, yeah, there are still 45 or 50 teams that could make the playoff, meaning in the Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC, Iowa. Anybody outside of those 5 would be a big stretch. Wisconsin's got a difficult schedule. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC, Iowa. Those are the main candidates out of the Big Ten. The SEC, Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas, Georgia. Texas A&M took a hit last week, of course. That would have been a big win for Texas A&M. They could not pull it off in the fourth quarter. So big loss for Texas A&M, big loss for LSU. They really are rooting for USC. Texas A&M is really rooting for Notre Dame. Their path has been minimized considerably. If 10-2 is the mark, and we know from running all the models as we have here at the Voice of College Football through all those playoff years, to say 10-2 gets you there, 9-3, you got a long shot. They would have needed 9-3 with a big non-conference win. So Texas A&M, LSU on life support. Florida State obviously on life support. The rest of the ACC, understand that Clemson looked horrible in week 1. However, that does not impact the ACC race. Now, does that show us that they're going to be non-competitive in the ACC? You could think that. I don't believe it. I would have to see it. I think that Clemson is going to resemble what they've been post-Trevor Lawrence. And that's they're going to win a lot of games, 23-14 against the likes of their schedule. Boston College, Syracuse, those kind of teams. So in the ACC, I'm looking at first and foremost, Miami playing like the best, having the best roster, the best 2 deep, the best quarterback, best offensive line, best weapons in the ACC. Best defensive front also belongs to Miami. They are a clear favorite for me at this point. I'm not necessarily overreacting to beating a bad Florida team or a talented yet dysfunctional Florida team by a lot. on the road. That's a really good win for Miami. That was a huge win in the way that they did it as well. Not just that they kicked a field goal at the end and won. No, they stomped Florida. They haven't done that in a long time, really gone out of conference and kicked someone around. So for Miami, they are, to me, the clear favorite, more so than any team in any conference. They are the clear favorite. Maybe Utah. But Virginia Tech. Well, Mark, they lost to Vandy by 2 touchdowns. Or they were a 2-touchdown favorite, lost to Vandy. Yes, they could compete in the ACC. NC State, of course, we're talking about their big game against Tennessee on Saturday night as a big push for them toward making the playoff as a non-champion. But regardless of what happens to these ACC teams outside the conference and how bad they look, and other than Miami winning, most of it's been a bad look outside the conference. They're still playing for a conference championship. So really, well, everyone in the ACC is alive, even Florida State. They'll need some help. But the other 16 teams in the ACC don't have a loss, don't have anything. We've only seen 2 ACC games, and Florida State lost them both. So it's wide open for the ACC. But legitimately, I think it's Miami, it's Clemson, it's NC State, those 3 in particular, Louisville on the outside, and then maybe some kind of wild card. Georgia Tech's got a big win already. Look at the Georgia Tech-Syracuse game coming up on the ACC network on Saturday. Georgia Tech and Syracuse, the winner of that game takes a nice little step forward in the ACC, especially if it's Georgia Tech. They get to 2-0 in the ACC. How about that? In the Big 12, again, let's start with the obvious math that everyone's alive. So 16 teams are alive. And in the ACC, in the Big 12, it's a little bit more difficult than the ACC because I legitimately think that more teams are viable for that conference championship. You would not surprise me if you said Oklahoma State, Kansas State, West Virginia, Iowa State, Utah are going to win the Big 12. You would only slightly surprise me if you said West Virginia. And unless I'm missing somebody else, everybody else to me would be a surprise. Cincinnati, Arizona State, Houston, BYU, UCF. UCF is going to be a fun team to watch. They scored 57 the first week. They've got an excellent running back in RJ Harvey, KJ Jefferson at quarterback, Gus Malzahn dialing up the plays. They'll be fun to watch, but they're getting all the toughest teams in the Big 12. Their schedule is tough. But UCF's going to be fun to watch. Kansas, I slipped by Kansas. They've got a game against Illinois on the road. But just to underline these Big 12 situations, Kansas, now we'll see if they go and just annihilate Illinois. That's a great look. But they're a 5-point favorite against one of the worst teams in the Big 10. If they go in there and win by 5, okay, it's a win. They checked it off, moved on. But that's not going to move the needle in terms of my evaluation of the Big 12. My evaluation of the Big 12 right now is that they've only played one game that really counts. I know they're 14-2. That's the record I heard. Who else lost besides West Virginia? Houston lost to UNLV. So that's a bad look. I know Houston's probably the worst team in the Big 12, but they lost to UNLV. They lost to a group of 5 Mountain West team at home by 20 points. So that's a bad look for the conference. But does it really matter? No. And West Virginia is a slightly bad look because they should have been competitive with Penn State, and they really weren't. So as we go into week 2, with all these opportunities on the table for the Big 12, and we're talking a lot of Big 12 football here today, folks, that there's a lot of opportunity there, but it's in quantity. It's not in quality. The Big 12 needs to step up this week and win these games decidedly because they're a favorite in most of them. But so far, it's been 2 downers by Houston and West Virginia. In the SEC, well, they lost 2 marquee games. But were they embarrassing losses? Absolutely not. LSU, USC, it came down to a field goal with 2 seconds on the clock. Okay. LSU lost the game, though. The SEC lost the game. The SEC, Texas A&M, lost the game against Notre Dame at home. That should prove to be a pretty good loss if there is such a thing, and there is. The rest of the conference has done fine, but they haven't played anyone. The only team that won a game, Georgia over Clemson, of course. That was the big win. Florida losing to Miami. That's a bad look because that it was a rout. But Florida should lose to Miami, even though they were just a 3-point underdog. That being the deal. They lost at home in a rout. They were not competitive. So bad look for the SEC there. That's the only bad look for the SEC was that game. The other two losses are just losses that they need to take a hit on, but they weren't bad losses. The teams were competitive. They were good football games. Florida's an embarrassment. And then on the plus side for the SEC, nothing so far. Nothing. They went out and beat a ton of SCS teams by 75 points. So no pluses for the SEC in week one, a couple hits. For the ACC, it's been nothing but downers except for Miami. Take everything that I said about Florida, apply that to Miami, although we could be seeing the ACC champion in Miami just kicking around the 14th best team in the SEC. So that's not a great accomplishment, but they did what they should do. But other than that, it's been all bad luck for the ACC. Florida State losing to two other ACC teams should come out equal, but they're expected to be an upper echelon team. And nobody expects Boston College or Georgia Tech to go 10-2, 11-1 like was forecasted by many for Florida State. So that's actually a negative for the ACC. Those two losses by Florida State, a negative for the conference. Now, mathematically, it's a wash. But in terms of perception and the value of getting one of their top schools into the playoff, those are bad games for the ACC. Clemson getting annihilated, bad for the ACC. Virginia Tech loses as a 2-touchdown favorite. It's been all bad for the ACC so far. All bad. Is there a good win in there anywhere? No. No good wins yet. Duke can go to Northwestern and win. Shoot, at this point, if Florida State just wins a game, they've got Memphis in 2 weeks. They've got a bye week this week. Shoot, Clemson beating App State after the way they looked in week one is just, it shouldn't be a big win, shouldn't be a good win, but that would be good that if Clemson took care of business against App State, and they should. Outside of Duke Northwestern, I'm not seeing any opportunities that, well, NC State and Tennessee, there's your major opportunity. If NC State, they will really save face for the ACC, but most likely, I really don't see that happening. But there's that game. The Big Ten, of course, Michigan, Texas, that's huge for the Big Ten. And other than that, Iowa, Iowa State. Those are the two big showings for the Big Ten. If Illinois would pull off an upset at home against Kansas, big feather in the cap for the Big Ten. One of their expected worst teams wins. Nebraska, Colorado. If Nebraska loses to Colorado again, that's a bit embarrassing. But Nebraska may step into the Big Ten and be what they've been for the last 7 years. There's a lot of hope there because they got the 5-star quarterback and they won by a zillion points their first game against UTEP. But let's see it. Let's see it against somebody for Nebraska. So if Nebraska goes out, steps on a rake against Colorado, that's going to look bad for the Big Ten temporarily. But then Nebraska may jump into the Big Ten and get smacked around there. Or Nebraska doesn't get smacked around. They lose in the last 3 minutes of every game. So if they continue to do that. So Big Ten right now, Minnesota's lost to North Carolina at the gun. So that's, I don't want to say that's a hit for the Big Ten because Minnesota's supposed to be one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. That's what they look like. And North Carolina is a much higher seeded team out of the ACC. So that should not be a knock against the Big Ten. Oregon struggled. Penn State beat West Virginia. So the Big Ten comes out slightly ahead. They won their big non-conference game in week 1. They got that one done. The other ones, Minnesota lost again. I don't see that as a big deal. All right. Appreciate you being here. The Voice of College Football. It's a big day on a Friday as we've got the Oklahoma show at 4, Clemson at 5:30. Then you've got me in the postgame show after the games on Friday night. So give me a call tonight. We'll see you then at the Voice of College Football. College football is even more exciting with some action on the line. And the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now.